welcome from my side. I want to talk about hops, but not about the normal hops presentation that people might give you if they want to sell you something, because I want to turn it a little bit around. I want to show you how you can save money from those hop purchases that you need to do. And when you were buying hops 1 year ago, it was a wonderful time because hops were so cheap. There was so much in the world. When you look into the world market today, hops have become very expensive because we had a very bad crop in Europe. And also the other world market indicators of cost increases, of wages, which have become more expensive, energy has become more expensive, packaging material is more expensive. Everything becomes more expensive. So how can we find ways to still keep our costs in check and still make the amazing beers that our consumers like? So I want to give you a practical guideline, really. What can you do? How can you talk with your hop dealers and try to make sure that you get a good deal for your beers in those challenging cost times? So basically, I'm going to share 5 ways with you. Some are a little bit obvious, but I still want to mention them. Others might be a little bit more extreme because they require you to change your formulas. And of course, some brewers don't like to touch their formulas of the hot sellers, but your hot sellers are the products that usually cost the most because they sell in the highest quantities. So what I want to talk about is what can you do when you don't want to change your hops, when you want to keep to the same exact varieties that you have been using for the last years. What can you do if you are willing to switch hops but still keep the same taste? And what can you do if you're willing to go a little bit down into your beer recipes and adjust them to a certain extent while still keeping them in the profile as they are, give or take? Because we always have fluctuations. Just in the discussion round before, there was the discussion about fluctuations, and those fluctuations are here to stay. From year to year, we have harvest and crop fluctuations in malts, in hops, in all the different products that we use for beer. So that's something that we have to live with, and as a brewer, you are used to that. So let's start with the obvious and the easiest to do. You want to stick to your hops, but you want to save on them. There are various ways. The first is, if you have your long runners, your beers which are always selling, your lagers, your pale ale maybe, those varieties which are always in your portfolio. Many brewers don't pick the opportunity of long-term contracts because they want to stick to the spot market and make a bargain. Well, this works in some years, in some other years it doesn't. This year it certainly does not at all. The prices have skyrocketed and sometimes it's 100% more expensive than the year before. With long-term contracts, you are basically hedging your purchasing on a 10-year average price. So this is usually a rate which is maybe a little bit higher than in the very cheap years, but if you don't contract for 100% of your demand, you always have this flexibility in the cheap years to buy the extra that you need. But in the expensive year, you have your baseline, which is controlled in cost. Another way to save money is, of course, not order every month, but bundle your shipments. So make sure you have slightly higher volumes, and those usually come with logistic costs benefits. And the third, and especially in this crop, very important aspect is consider earlier crops. I know in India it's not very easy because we have laws prohibiting you from taking crops which are beyond the shelf life or even approaching the end of their shelf life. It needs to be always fresh. And that's what we want as brewers. We want to have fresh beer, so we want to use fresh ingredients. But if you look, for example, to the 2021 crop of European hops, those hops are still a higher quality than the 2022 crop, which was of a very poor quality. Yes, it's 1 year older, but this 1 year did not affect it in a way which is reducing the quality significantly. So open up maybe to the possibility of going 1 year or 2 years prior to the crops, because those hops are the ones which are also offered for a bargain in most cases. The second option that you have, you can try to switch to slightly different hop varieties. You still use the same hop product, so if you're with pellets, you continue to use pellets, but if you use one very specific hop variety, there are 280 varieties in the portfolio of most of the big hop sellers. So among those 280, do you think they're all 100% unique? I would certainly doubt it. It's always an option to have one which is very similar, and replacing one of those similars might be a closer match to your beer than taking the last year's crop of this one. Because from year to year, you also have variations, and these variations can be bigger than switching from one quality and one variety to another within one crop year. So it's really a teasing question, and the answer I know for certain is yes, batch-to-batch variations can be bigger than shifting to another variety which is close. Then there are some hop varieties which usually have these trademark symbols or registered trademark symbols. Those are the branded hops. They are fancy, they are nice, they are very fruity. Usually they are from the Americas. They also come at a price. They are very expensive, and of course you can use them, but if you want to save a little bit here and there are many other hop varieties which might not be so well known, coming maybe from other countries as well, but with a very similar profile that you can replace. And this is something that we will be happy as well to recommend other alternatives to the varieties which sell at very, very high rates usually. And another area which is also especially in the craft beer industry, if you use aroma hops exclusively and you don't go for bitter hops like Magnum or Hercules, you can make amazing beers, because usually those aroma hops have very nice values of alpha acids versus beta acids and the other ingredients which are in there. So the bitterness profiles are very rounded and very mellow. They are very good. But if you want to save a little bit, you might reconsider using those aroma hops in your kettle editions, especially when it comes to the earlier kettle editions. There are cheaper hops, which are the bitter varieties, Magnum and Hercules I mentioned. They sell in huge amounts worldwide, and therefore their value for money when it comes only to the IBUs and the bitterness levels in your brew, they are much better than using a Sarts or using a Citra or using some of those other dual-use hops, because you waste a lot of money with the aroma part, which you don't want to have when it's only about the bitterness at the beginning of a boil. The third way, which is a little bit taking it further away from the products that you might use to, into other product delivery formats. When you brew a beer, you add hops for many different reasons. It's not only for the bitterness, you know that, and it's not only for the aroma. It gives you foam, it gives you technical stability, it kills your bacteria. So it has many technical benefits besides the obvious taste and aroma benefits. Of course, it's increasing drinkability, and you want to make your consumers happy. The way to achieve that comes from the hops, and in the hops you have the lupulin. That's the basic theory behind it. Basically what you find in hops is two major contributors. It's the hop oils, which give you the nice aroma, and it's the alpha acid, which is part of the soft raisins, that give you the technical performance, the bitterness and everything that comes with it. Now, when you're after the bitterness in this regard, there are many ways to compare the composition of the different hop products which are in the world market on offer. The standard is always the fresh hop cone or the dried hop cone. And then there are many products that you might be used to, like the standard pellets, type 90. They're very close in the composition to the fresh or the dried hop. If you compress those pellets into the P45 type or the lupulin type, or some of our competitors give it fancy name like cryo hops and these kind of things, the principle is always the same. You chill those hops, very freeze dry it basically, so that the lupulin, which is a resin, is not cloaking, and then you're able to compress it and you concentrate it higher. And this gives you benefits because you have less loss and less plant material given into your beers. But in the composition, they're still very close to the original dry hop cones. Then there are some extracts. You have one variety of extracts which is derived from ethanolic extraction. It's not very common anymore. It used to be in the past, but it went out of favor because everyone is after CO2 extracts in the extract world. It's more modern. If you compare the composition of a CO2 extract to the fresh hop cones or the dried hop cones, it's actually quite different because it's a selective extraction process. You don't get the full composition of hop in a CO2 extract. If you want to go for an extract which is easy to apply in a bigger brewery, but also possible for a smaller brewery, you might consider a total raisin extract. The ethanol, which is used for the extraction, is totally evaporated at the end, so there's 0.0% left in it. Regards to ABV in your beer, it's nothing. You can even use it in an alcohol-free beer. If you move very far away from this, in terms of the composition, then there are the other downstream products. Most craft brewers would hardly use those. Honestly speaking, this is for the big breweries which are basically spilling out millions of hectoliters. They have their advantages and disadvantages. I don't want to go into this area because it's really a topic to discuss about its own. But what's relevant, I think, is this comparison of these different hop products, because they are varying in their composition. You see on the right side, the extracts, they're not 100% comparable to the hop cones as they are in the fresh or dried form. If you stick with the total raisin extract, you're quite close to it. If you go for the CO2 extract, you're moving away. Now, why would you use products like these? It's all about cost. This is what the topic of the presentation is about. If you do a ranking of how much you can save by using those products, let's consider you start with conventional P90 products. This is your product that you use normally. If you want to save based on this, you can use P45 pellets because they are higher in concentration. They give you more value for money. They soak up less wort or less beer if you use them in dry hopping. And they're basically a higher concentrated version. Still, in terms of the technical performance, very similar to the original P90 format. If you want to go a little bit further, you can go for the CO2 extract. Yes, it's not 100% as in the pellet, but cost and use-wise, it's cheaper. If you want to go even a little bit more cheap, it's with the ethanol-based extracts, the total raisin extracts. The reason why these are cheaper, even though they are closer to the pellet 90 type, is that in a CO2 extract, you first need to do a pellet out of the fresh hop. And this pelletizing costs money. It comes with loss, and therefore it costs something. The total raisin extract takes the fresh and the dried hop cones as the starting materials. You skip this step, that's money in your pocket. This is when you stay with the conventional non-isomerized products. But the indication that I gave you with isomerized, I mean, this is what you're after with all your bitter hops and your boiling additions in the wort. You want to transfer the alpha acid into isoalpha acid. Now, when you compare the different products, CO2 extract, type 90 pellets, and isomerized pellets and isomerized cattle extract, you see very different performance curves when it comes to the time and the efficiency of how this bitterness is created in your wort and in the final beer. The pellets type 90, the green curve, is a very slow build. And the maximum transition of what you can get in the best brew house of the world is maybe 35 to 40%, which means that 65 to 60% of all the bitterness, all the alpha acid that was in your fresh hop is going down the drain. You have to throw it away because in the boiling, you're not able to take it out of the hops and transfer it into alpha acid. When I talk about loss, my heart always hurts because that's money. And if you can prevent that loss, we could start to do it. The CO2 extract, the orange curve, you see it's a little bit better, but it's still a conventional hop product. It's a different way of giving it into the beer and the wort, but it's still not helping you much in terms of your performance and efficiency in the brew house. Now look at the isomerized products. This is basically taking what you do in your boiling to the factory of the hop processor. So by pre-isomerizing the pellets, which are very similar to the composition of the normal type 90 pellets, you not only save an tremendous time. After 10, 15 minutes, your IBU is already there. And at the level which is much higher than what you could ever dream of with a conventional product. Yes, it is a different product. It is pre-isomerized. It has undergone some stress. So if you look for the most fresh and cleanest aroma hop profile, I would not really recommend taking a pre-isomerized Cascade pellet, for example. But if you're looking for bitter pellet addition, for example, this can save you an enormous amount of money because it can reduce your boiling time if your other parameter allow for that, and it can give you much higher yields. So you can basically halve the volume that you dose, and even though those products per kilogram are a little bit more expensive, your cost in use will be massively down. This is a complete overview of the different products that basically all the big hop processors have in their portfolio. So you see the conventional products. The best what you can do in the brew house is up to 40%. 40% conversion rate. I mean, most brewmasters might dream of that, I guess. With the pre-isomerized products, iso extract, almost 100% of what you take in there stays in the beer, gets to where you want it. Now, if somebody wants to save a lot of money and take only iso extracts, I would strongly argue against that because that bitterness is just too harsh. That would not be a nice beer. It's the balance that does it, and that's what we recommend to our brewers. Play around with a different kind of products because taking only one is limiting your selection, and it's also making your taste monodimensional. If you bitter only with iso extract, you have a very harsh, sharp bitterness, not a very pleasant beer profile. Some people who use this product maybe use it to top it up and to standardize the IBU in the final beer. So if we continue this ranking of how much you can save by using the different kind of products, again, starting from the pellet 90, you could switch to the isomerized pellets, if it's bitter pellets preferably. Those will certainly give you a strong cost increase because you can lower the dosage massively. If you're open to extracts, you could consider the pre-isomerized cattle extracts. Those are for bittering additions usually, but you also have aroma varieties with these. The biggest saving is with the iso extract, but as I mentioned, not 100%, maybe up to 30% of the total bitterness could come from this. But as it is basically concentrated full iso alpha acid, there's no loss, nothing at all. It goes in and it goes where it is needed. Which takes me to the fourth way, which is about the losses that you have in a brew house. And there are many losses throughout the whole brewing process, not only in dry hopping, where we'll come to at the end. Again, you remember this picture. Many things which the hop is supposed to do, you can use it in different stages in your brewing process. And with this very simple schematics, you can see how most of the hop products are used throughout the brewing process. At the beginning, it tends to be more the pellet types. You can use extracts there as well, of course, but most brewers would use pellets at the beginning in the brew house, and also when you start to enter the cold zone into fermentation and then dry hopping, you can also do that with pellets, obviously. The further you go downstream, however, the more the likelihood that you could switch to something liquid. Liquid extracts, maybe even hop oils or isolated products which are very specific to one standard need for the beer. Now, when you use those kind of hop products, whatever you use, pellet or extract, it doesn't matter. You basically have one decision to make, because the time when you use it defines what you lose. You add your hop very early, you get a great bitterness performance, but you cook off all the aroma which might be in there. If you add your hops late, you get the beautiful aroma out of the hop oils. So when you use the pellets for late hopping in the whirlpool or dry hopping at the end, you get all the full aroma, but you waste the bitterness which might have been in there. So the real question is not only when to dose your hops, but what do you prefer to lose? I know it's a little bit controversial to ask a question like this. Most brewers split the hop dosages, use the bitter hops at the beginning, the aroma hops at the end, but still, it's the same dilemma. You're losing one aspect of the hop because everything is together in these hops. You have the bitterness, you have the aroma, it's all in the same hop product, unless you split those up. And that's something that we do in the hop industry. We split the bitterness parts as alpha acid extracts, aroma part as hop oils, and specialty extracts which are separating those functions. What does that do for you? Well, it stops your loss, because when you add the alpha extract, there's no hop oil in there. So you only pay for what you put in your beer and what ends up in your beer without being wasted. But I guess the biggest aspect of really those losses is in the dry hopping. And that's obviously a big topic for craft brewers. When you use pellets for dry hopping, you know this dilemma. You throw something in there, and it's blowing up by 6 times in volume and even 12 times in weight. And those increases in volume are especially painful because that's your valuable beer. That's in there and you have to throw away. So you have your wort loss when you use it early, or you have your beer loss when it's already fermented. And this can be up to 30% and sometimes even more. If you have a double dry hopped IPA, this is really painful because it's a lot of beer soaked up and thrown out of the way. The second aspect of this is you need to get those hops out there somehow. And even in the most advanced breweries with centrifuges and most state-of-the-art filtering systems, it's still a mess getting those hop residues out there. So when you're talking about small setups, this is a lot of time involved and not the best part of dry hopping. So there are ways how to bypass that, how to circumvent that. One way is a device like that here on the right side. This one is called a Hopsteiner, but you find those kind of devices from many different producers. What they do is basically they bypass part of the beer and super enrich it with the hops, therefore reduce the loss extremely, and then give this super enriched beer stream back into the rest. So you separate it, you put it together, you mix it, your whole beer is dry hopped. It's a good way, but only if your brewery has a certain size, because devices like these are not for free, and usually we say something like this makes sense when you have more than 10,000 hectoliter per year, and that's already a decent size. There are easier ways how to save on the waste, and that's by using the isolated products, because there are more and more hop oils in the market which are the isolated aroma part of those hop varieties that you look for. the Citras, the Cascades, all those American hops, also the European noble hops, Hallertau Tradition, Pearly, Saaz. You have those varieties. And those hop oils have different benefits because you can use them in different stages of the brewing process. You can add them early in the whirlpool. You can add them during fermentation, then you have the enzymatic reactions with the yeast and the biotransformation. What it always does is reduces your loss to zero because you only give in what needs to be in there and stays in there. So no need to remove anything, no beer loss at all. You have to store and ship and use only very small volumes because this is the concentrated stuff. This is what you want to get out of the hop pellets, and it's already there for you in the most convenient form. Of course, using hop pellets has other benefits in dry hopping. And I wouldn't say stop doing traditional dry hopping completely. If you play around with the combination, then it can help you save a lot of money, especially just by saving on the soaked up beer. Another benefit, if you're doing non-alcoholic beers, this will keep you away from the hop creep effect. Because whenever you're using dry hopping on a non-alcoholic beer, those vegetative matter, it comes with yeast on it, naturally occurring. You have a post-fermentation, you have alcohol developing, and if you are bound by laws in your countries, it can be tricky. Not even talking about explosions of bottles and stuff like that. There are many more benefits of this. Of course, it also has disadvantages. We need to mention it as well, because if you use a isolated hop oil as it comes out of the hop cone, it will not lead to the same taste of the final beer. If you use the oil early in the boil, not in the boil, in the whirlpool maybe after cooling down or then in fermentation, it comes close to the taste that you would expect from a dry hop beer. The simple benefit is in the hop oil you have everything which was in the hop cone, but not everything of that enters your beer normally, because you know that there are soluble parts and there are insoluble parts, and when you use oils which are just extracted from the hop cones without further refinement, you add everything. And you even add stuff which normally would never make its way into a beer. And therefore, we recommend don't go for those generic variety-specific oils because they are 100% of the oil composition. That sounds nice, but for the taste of your beer, it's not authentic. Go for something which is more fractionated so that the producer is cutting out the variety-specific aroma type that you really want to have in your beer. And when you add those kind of products, you can make almost indistinguishable matches of your current recipes by going with that and save a lot of money at the end. And that's what I wanted to share with you, and I'm open for questions either now or also during the day, today and tomorrow. I'm going to be at the OM Brew booth over there for the Wireman part as well. So just come over and approach me. I'm happy to go into discussions.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I have 3 questions. For one, I'm very interested in the hop oils to try. I've never worked with them. How do they transport and store? Because getting stuff to India with like fresh hops, often an issue. You get stuff that has been sitting in a government warehouse or at customs in the sun for a while, and you get kind of cheesy hops and stuff. The hop oils, how stable are they? Do they need to be chilled? Do I have to worry that when they arrive in India that they're kind of decomposed halfway, or are they like super stable?
Usually most of the hop oils are shelf stable for 2 years. Some are stable for 3 years. When you compare that to the hop cones, we at Hopsteiner give 5-year shelf life. I know that some of our competitors only give 3 years. With the remaining shelf life that you need to have for importing, it means you should usually not run into trouble, because with the 2 years even, we're talking about very small volumes. So if you want to have 5 hectoliters basically work with this one, it's a small bottle. So that's different issue. You can bring this in by courier, which will not be as tricky as having big boxes and pallets.
Yeah, my question was less about the shelf life and stuff. It was more about does the aroma change if it's sitting for, like, let's say 2 weeks in a 30, 40, 50 degree hot warehouse?
Oh, okay.
Is the product more stable flavor-wise than like a normal pellet?
It is comparable. It's not better and not worse because it's basically isolated. The extraction process was temperature stressed to some extent. So we, of course, recommend to have the full shelf life to store it chilled. But since most of this goes by air freight, none of this is chilled, and we've never had any complaint with that.
Okay, no, that was my question. So, like, ideally, my supplier would have it chilled and ship it kind of chilled. Cool. The other one, I'm not sure if you can answer that. Do you know for the downstream hop products, let's say hop oils, which are not like super processed, do you know in India if there's any like requirements for putting on the label? I know 90% of the people here don't have to print labels and don't care and can put in whatever they want. But do you know if there's any requirements here by any chance?
I don't know anything India specific. What I know is for the US, for Europe, and the Codex countries, which is usually followed by most of the administrations worldwide. Especially the Codex countries, they are more or less the smallest common denominator. They allow this to be a hop extract, which it is, because it's a very natural extraction process done with thin film or the most basic type of extraction, which is with steam, like you would extract any essential oil. And since it comes from hops and nothing but hops, it's a hops extract. We had this checked, especially for the US and Europe, because we were also not very sure. There are things like purity laws as well, which go beyond the country laws. Even in those contexts, it's perfectly fine to use hop oils and declare it as a hop extract. If you don't declare hop extract but hop only, in some countries that might lead to problems, but I'm not sure about India, honestly speaking.
Cool, perfect. And the last one, I think you kind of touched on that. So if I want to use some more modern, more interesting hop varieties as hop oils, we had like a very nice presentation earlier today about biotransformation. So if I wanted to use a hop that has a lot of precursor of the thiols and whatever, they will be in the hop oil as well, correct? Or not? Because like the precursors are usually bound to amino acids or to like sugars. Will they be in the hop oil, or are they like unsoluble and like I won't get that so much?
As they are part of the hop oil, they will be in there. The question is, what kind of hop oil type would you want to go for? If you want to have the biotransformation at your site, then you should go for a more complete hop oil, so nothing fractionated, because that might kill some of those sulfury components. You would go rather for a variety-specific whole oil, and you would use it usually at the beginning of fermentation. That's what we always recommend, because then the yeast activity will give you the best results, and it will evaporate all those things like the myrcene and those monoterpenes, which you don't want to have in your beer anyway. So if you use those complete oils, then yes, you can have that biotransformation and the creation of those compounds in your beer locally. What's happening right now in the hop industry is to preempt that process as well. So there are now research work going on hop oils which have undergone this type of fermentation. So you don't need to do it, you can still add it at the end of your, basically put it in a bright beer tank, and you already have those sulfury notes in there because the oil itself was basically fermented or co-fermented. But that's not available in the market yet as much as I know, not from Hopsteiner and from the competitors also not. So if you want to go for that benefit, use a complete oil, add it early, preferably beginning of fermentation, and you get those benefits from the oil.
My question is about the aroma hops. So aroma hops, when we do the dry hopping in the fermentation, uh, is there a way to like get more extraction out of it? Because once we add it to the fermenter, most of the time it just gets settled in the cone of the fermenter. So first the question is like how much time should we give for the dry hopping? Like should be more than a week. And second question is like in case we do let's say grinding of the these pellets hops, let's say powdering it and then adding it to the fermenter, will that help to get a more extraction of the aromatics?
Maybe I start with the second question. Grinding will not really help you. Maybe slightly, but it's basically when you throw in the pellets into the finished beer and leave it in the tank, it's soaking up everything and it's getting out everything. Grinding it is not really going to help you with it. Maybe it's going to speed up the extraction a little bit. But I think if you leave the hops there for a week or a couple of days, that makes no difference at the end. If you only have it for one day in there, for a very quick dry hopping, yes, then it might give you a small benefit, but not very much. The first question for how long, how much, well, that's philosophical because there are so many different ways how to approach that. Some people are a fan of stirring the beer. So if you have a possibility to stir up your beer during the time when the hop is I don't want to dry up my whole beer. I only take a little bit of it and do a hop infusion. As I mentioned with this device, the Hopsteiner or those kind of side devices. You can also mimic that in a craft small setup. Bucket to cook the wort. You could do that with like tea filters or things like that by putting them in, so that you don't expose the hop to everything. And to tell you, do it like this or do it like that. Every variety will behave differently. And then, of course, your beer, what is your, all the other ingredients that you have in there, adjuncts, whatever, it all has an influence. But I agree, most people would leave there for a strong IPA, they would leave hop pellets in there for a week and would take them out afterwards. It's really a philosophical question.
Anyway, thanks.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Could I call upon stage Mr. Suraj Nair? I'm so sorry. Could I request you to stay on? We'd like to give you a little memento.
Okay.